ICQ Podcast episode 274, PiStar 12 months on. Hello fellow amateur radio enthusiasts and welcome to this, our 274th episode of the ICQ Amateur Ham Radio Podcast, supported by Charles Riley, Golf for Juliet Quebec X-Ray, and our monthly and annual subscription donors. In this episode, Martin M1MRB is joined by Leslie, Golf 0 Charlie India Bravo, Edmund, Mike 0 Mike November Golf, Bill Barnes, November 3 Juliet India X-Ray, and Matthew, Mike 0 November Juliet X-Ray to discuss the latest amateur ham radio news. Myself, Colin M6BOY, rounds up the news in brief, and this episode's feature is revisiting PiStar 12 months on. Well, as always, it's our donors that help keep us advert free on the show and help us pay our way on the internet and keep producing the shows. This episode, we'd like to thank Charles Riley, Golf for Juliet Quebec X-Ray, who sent us across a donation, wishing us a happy 10th birthday. We thank you for that donation, Charles. And Charles's donation, along with the monthly and annual subscription donors, they help us pay our way on the internet. If you find value in the show and you would like to show your appreciation, we'd ask you to visit www.icqpodcast.com/donate, where anything you send away is always greatly appreciated. Well, now we join Martin, Leslie, Bill, Edmund and Matthew to discuss latest amateur ham radio news, including FCC actions against handhelds and propagation wheel returns. Hope you enjoy.
Well, hi guys, and welcome to this episode's News Roundtable for episode 274 of the ICQ podcast. Tonight, I'm joined by Mr. Leslie Butterfield G0CIB, who Bill tells me you're the opening act.
I don't know what to say, Martin. And me, the opening act. I'm just here. I do me thing. So what else can I do? Very good evening to one and all, and to any listeners out there.
No
Great
problem.
to be back.
No problems, mate. I thought you was the superstar, not the opening act. but there we go. I also have Mr. Edmund Spicer M0MNG. Good evening, Edmund.
Hello, Martin. Hello, everybody.
Hi, mate, and good to have you with us. Mr. Matthew Nassau is with us, M0NJX. Hi, Matt.
Hey, everybody. How are you?
And last but not least is Mr. Bill Barnes, N3JIX, who's here to make sure Leslie behaves himself.
Hey, good evening, everybody. If I'm not picking on Leslie, then something's wrong with me. Not feeling well, I guess. But nope, we're good tonight, so we're picking on Leslie.
Yeah. And as I just said
Martin,
before,
I always behave myself.
I know, Leslie. You behave yourself while we're recording. You don't always behave yourself when we're getting ready. But that's what makes these...
cuts are on the floor.
Yeah. Now, that's what makes these record sessions fun. And I know Frank would love to do another session with you. So that's good. Anyway, let's get started. There's not very many news stories today, but they're quite contentious, and we've been probably arguing a little bit about these for a while. First news story says that the FCC has taken action regarding illegally marketed HTs, or handy-talkies, walkie-talkies, whatever you call them. And, I just got it in my mind this was a let's go bash the Chinese manufacturers, but they kind of, if they're advertising them wrong, I can kind of understand a little bit about this. Leslie, you sent me this in the week. Do you want to go first on this one?
Well, we've got a program here called Dad's Army, and I'm just diving under the table with my tin lid on, so waiting for the shells to come in. Right. So I just sort of go over to about the story. It's about the Bofengs and associated radios that have come on the market, and the FCC have kicked up a stink. Basically, as I read their document, it's about them being widebandable. In other words, they can operate on other frequencies. They're not worried about radio amateurs because radio amateurs use their proper frequencies, but they can be used on other frequencies, and they, to put it bluntly, they're getting a hump about it. That's a story, Martin.
Yeah. Well, I know I got very stroppy about this, and I may be doing it in a while. Bill, it's your side of the pond. What do you think?
Yeah, this one's actually relatively simple, I think. The company said to the FCC, we would like to sell these two models under Part 90, private land mobile radio use, and they were granted authorization, but the radios are too powerful. They're only allowed to go up to 1.78 watts, but they can go up to 1 or 4 watts. So, with all these kind of stories with the FCC, there's a lot of part in the, going back and forth that, we may not be aware of, but I'm sure that they discussed it out, and it's just, this is something that feels like to me, like, I'm not really sure how these radios work, but it feels like this might be just something as simple as, firmware update to disable the 4-watt mode, and then they're okay. So, and likewise, they need to be in very specific bands, too. Another thing that feels like it might just be a firmware update or something. There was a little bit of buzz online through some of the, forums and that kind of stuff that these things are being, sold for land mobile use. But the article specifically says that they were granted authorization in 2012. They're just using too much power, so they're just breaking the rules.
Right. So that's an interesting one that they've gone after upon that rule. Edmund, your thoughts on this one?
I have mixed feelings in both directions on this. I quite like wide-banded radios, not because I have any intention of transmitting on frequencies illegally, but because it future-proofs them and makes them more usable. So if in the UK we were to get any band extensions, then if you've got a radio that isn't locked to specific frequencies within VHF or UHF, you can then use it. Same applies if you ever go abroad to countries where the band limits are different. And I've got an example of that here. I won a Yaesu FT252E, which is a 2-meter only rig that is locked on transmit to between 144 and 145.999. So if I were ever to go to the States, and if I went on a road trip, for example, it would be a perfect radio to take because it's rugged and wouldn't easily get broken. But over there in the States, where the top of the band is 148 megs rather than 146, I wouldn't be able to use that radio to transmit on any of the simplex frequencies, I think I'm right in saying, and most of the repeaters. So it wouldn't be much use at all. So for that reason, I'm kind of edging on the side of I quite like having things wide-banded, and if somebody was absolutely hell-bent on transmitting illegally on a particular frequency, they would find a way of doing it, irrespective of whether these restrictions came in or not. And in fact, locking radios down might actually encourage illegal transmissions in amateur bands rather than anywhere else in the VHF or UHF spectrum. So why, if anybody anywhere is worried about it, why don't they just lock the radios down to license-free frequencies for the part of the world they're sending it to, but leave it unlockable by software? So that at least would knock out people causing interference just by using things straight out of the box without having any idea of what frequency they were transmitting on. But I don't really know, Martin, is the short answer.
Yeah, I kind of like your idea of, wide-banded radios. And some of mine are wide-banded and some aren't. The handy-talkies, certainly, if we travel abroad, you operate within the rules of the country you're going to via your SEP agreement. Therefore, as we said, our UK amateur radio handy-talkies are absolutely no use in the States when we go to Dayton next year. So that's a bit of a problem. Matt, what's your thoughts on this one?
Well, it's good to see the machinery in action. The FCC is trying to implement the right behaviors and protect, or with existing legislation, protect the spectrum by trying to minimize potential access to rigs which are potentially going to transmit in the wrong areas and the wrong power and all that kind of stuff. I think Bill's right. In this particular example, with the company in question, it's more about a marketing and power levels and how that gets changed. I guess I think the company is going to back to Bofeng themselves and ask that they get limited power changes and what have you. So I mean, if the product fits the legislation and the retailer has the right commercial checks and balances and approvals, various sections of various FCC regulations are met, then they can sell them. And I think that's one thing. But it's one element. Sorry, go ahead.
I think the phrase you're looking for is the boxes are ticked.
Yeah, very nicely put. Thank you. If exactly they tick the boxes, then they can sell them. But it's just one battle that the FCC and at least in the U.S., but spectrum regulators in general have in terms of protecting the frequencies to primary and secondary users, making sure people transmit where they can, with or without a license, versus where they should not because it's emergency services and what have you. And it's a big battle. How do you balance the fair use of equipment against pirates and malicious use in the spectrums causing havoc intentionally or unintentionally, and at the same time while balancing legitimate users versus trying to clamp down on illegal activity, you also want to manage the value of that spectrums against the future commercial use of frequencies, to support the Internet of Things or whatever else. They're trying to manage how the spectrum is being used today versus how it could be changed if it's misused in the future. I don't know. There's a lot of small print in all these sections. I got stuck on the first page trying to read section 2.803 of one of the acts. But again, it's good to see that it's good to have a story. I guess to Edmund's point, both good and bad. It's good to see a story about the regulators taking steps to stop inappropriate action. In this case, it seems to be commercial versus malicious use. But it's kind of bad in the sense that this kind of engagement is going to be a never-ending story. How do you control a public working with equipment that's available for sale to the public? That's a hard one to regulate.
In reality, this is a marketing exercise. They're saying they've got them over the power and how they've marketed them. Now, let's be brutally honest. If you wanted to, you could open up wideband your Kenwood Yaesu or ICOM rig. We all know you can do that. Let's be brutally honest about it. If I wanted to use a piece of PMR equipment, and lots of amateurs have used PMR equipment a la Motorola radios on DMR. Now, those Motorola radios are wide-banded. They cover well outside the amateur bands, and in fairness, and they're programmed exactly the same way, but they're not marketed the way these people are doing. And the difficulty is, even as we were coming on air, I was talking about buying at a rally last year a Citizens Band radio, a CB radio. I bought it for spare parts, and let's be brutally honest, I only paid £3 for it. There's enough spare parts in it. And when I got it home, I found it had actually been converted to 10 meters. Now, if somebody had bought that legitimately for use on CB, they'd have been screaming and hollering all over the amateur band and over the amateur satellite service without knowing about it. So kind of, I think it's how do you stop this sort of stuff? Somebody could be doing it pure by accident. And the radios that come out often from the manufacturers still have the test frequencies in. So if Joe Public buys a radio and he got two radios and he says, oh, look, well, I'll push the button on this one and I'll listen on that one. Yeah, that's all right. They're programmed up for me. Thank you very much. Off they go. And they haven't got a clue where they're transmitting. So there's two things, in my opinion. There's the information here of marketing it and overpower. But really, I don't know how to stop people just getting a radio like this, because radios these days are effectively small computers with a microphone and a loudspeaker instead of a screen and a keyboard. And I don't know what you guys think on that one.
Well, the thing is,
what I said earlier, which was that if a radio is being sent to a particular country, say the UK, the test frequencies that are in the memories, rather than using those, program it up to the 446 license-free band before sending it out. And okay, yes, it wouldn't be legal in the sense that it would be running too much power and it's not a type-certified radio for that band, but at least in terms of the frequencies you were transmitting on, you wouldn't be causing or you're unlikely to be causing any interference, but also leave the door open for the radio to be programmed by software and opened up for amateur users who, as per the example I gave a moment ago, might need, in certain circumstances, to transmit outside the band limits of the country they're in, if they go abroad, for example, because that way you sort of leave the door closed enough that Joe Public, who doesn't know anything about anything, let alone how to program a radio or have the cable to do it, they aren't going to easily be able to get the radio off the frequencies programmed in. But anybody who does know what they're doing and are using the radios legitimately, the radio will still be of use to them.
Yeah. Well, say, Leslie, you were going to say something.
No, I just remember many years ago. Do you remember the old 741 op amps and the 5.5 timers in Practical Wireless? I mean, they could be used for absolutely anything. You know, the only sort of limit was your imagination, and that was sort of technology. You could. It was adaptable to what you wanted, and the sort of genie was out of the box on that. It could be used to make washing machines, to all sorts of things. You know. And these radios, they're the same. They're software driven. They're programmable to what you want. The genie's out of the box.
I think you said that the biggest problem is the nut that holds the dial.
Yeah, well, yes, I did use that phrase.
Yeah. So quite a contentious story, and I knew this one would be. And we swapped the news story 1 and 2 around because the next one's kind of a continuation of this. But New Zealand are prohibited illegal use of two-way radios, and once again they're going for the same sort of thing of stopping programmable radios, guys. So maybe not linger too long on this one, but they're really going in a different way. Matthew, do you want to go first?
Conservative and more, you might call effective legislation against inappropriate use of radios is simply to limit their introduction to the country. I don't want to make an analogy to firearms, but in the UK, obviously we don't have guns, so the access to them is so heavily restricted that that's one way of managing firearms risk. And this is a pretty effective way of deciding that we're going to stamp out this problem of inappropriate use on they talks about police, forestry, rail frequencies by just limiting the access to the machines themselves. That's one way to do it.
Yeah, it certainly is. But then equally, and I agree with the gun laws in the UK, by the way. But equally, I could have a hot hatch or a sports car or whatever that can do well over the maximum speed limit of 70 miles an hour in the UK. That doesn't make it illegal to have it. It just means that I have to behave myself and obey the laws. So, Edmund, what do you think?
Well, nothing extra to add, really. The same answer as what I said last time for the same reasons.
Yeah, I did think this one would. It's worth mentioning it, but from that point of view, Bill, have you anything to add on this one?
No, I feel Matt's really encapsulated this correctly. I mean, you get them on the way in when they're made out of country, you're going to save yourself a whole world of problems up front. The thing that we have here in the States that's a little different is we do actually have stateside manufacturers. So this would not fix that problem, but it would fix the ones coming from other countries.
Right. So that's an interesting thing. Leslie, one last word?
No, I think that Matt encapsulated what's occurring very, very nicely indeed. I think he did it very well.
That's great. So, Matt, you did a good job on that one, and that's quite good. Now, the next one is, and Leslie and I have had a long discussion over the next two news stories, but Ofcom released UK ham radio callsign figures, and they broke them down into the different categories, like LR, G0, G1, G2, I think. Myself being an M1, it says that there are 2,274 other members apart from me that are M1s, and I thought I was reasonably unique. Me and Steve at the RSGB, I thought we were both fairly unique being M1s. So, but interesting set of numbers. Edmund, do you want to go first on this one?
Well, I was just smiling to myself because I only know one other M1, but M5, of which there are 297, apparently, two of them volunteer at Amberley Museum. So they make up probably about a third of the total volunteers there. So his rarity is, it all depends on who you know, doesn't it?
Yeah, it certainly does. There's a group of Northern Irish amateurs that are M5s, or actually MI5s, and they wouldn't give that up for a lot of money. When the M0s came out, there was a short period where did you want to upgrade your to an M0? And I think most of us decided we were M1 long enough, we were going to stay. But there you go. Bill, any comments on this from your side of the pond?
It's interesting. I thought this was a really interesting one, just in general, that they said the UK has a total of 87,983 live amateur radio call signs. When we talk about the next story, the numbers don't match. But that's a good, it's just good in general that they release some numbers, and it is very interesting how the different call sign groups laid out. Like, it's 58 G5s. I mean, that's fascinating. 164 G2, 1,596 2-1s. So that's the 2 E1 calls. So that's intermediates. I mean, very interesting. It's just interesting how they list out all the different call sign groups so that you could see where about people are, because it does say in here that you can tell the class of license by the call sign prefix. So you kind of got a feeling for how popular the foundation license is, and the 2 zeros and the 2 1s.
Yeah, certainly did, Bill. And let's face it, when I passed my test years ago, I got an M1, which was originally a B licensee. Leslie was an A licensee because he did the 12 words a minute Morse. I never got round to doing the 12 words a minute Morse, basically because Morse puts me to sleep every time I listen to it, and I don't mean that nastily. No, it does, Leslie, can't help it. But it's interesting if you look down through the license and you go back historically. G1s and G6, 7 and 8 were B licensees, like M1s were B licensees, and G0s, G2s, G3s, G4s, M0s originally had done Morse. The M5s had done 5 words a minute Morse, but that all went out the window about 10 years ago, and all the Gs and M's apart from M3 and M6 became full license holders. So but it's interesting looking back, I think. Matt, what's your thoughts?
Well, I can't dispute the numbers. It is interesting. It shows the shape and history of how the licenses were issued. I guess two things come up to mind. One is that someone had to actually issue a formal Freedom of Information Act request to get these numbers, which doesn't seem, I don't think these are state secrets or something, and they should be somewhat available from, if you asked Ofcom. Unfortunately, you have to make a formal governmental request to get this information out. So I think it's good that we have the mechanism, but do we really need to? And I guess the other is, in the U.S., calls can be, I guess you can get vanity calls and various things where someone's had a call, it then maybe gets retired or silent key, and it gets put back into the pool, and then someone can request that because they like the initials in the call sign or something, and they can get it and reuse it. And there's a lot of historical calls here with G prefix, which is a nice label for the United Kingdom, and I'm sure that there must be space in G2s and G5s and what have you that should enable supply if people wanted to make a request for a G call sign. So I've got an M0. I'd love to be a G something. That's just a personal preference about national call indicator and so forth. But clearly we have capacity, but we don't have a policy to enable it, to release those old G call signs and make them available. Even if people were to pay for them, you can imagine that. There's 87,000 licensees in the country. How many of them would actually pay for a G call? But that's it. That's all I'll say.
I think call signs are quite personal to you, and I remember a long, long time ago, a gentleman who became a silent key. He wanted me to take his call sign, or he talked about it. We never 100% agreed it. And quite honestly, I must admit, I declined because I've been an M1 for so long. People knew me as an M1. He had a G3 call sign, and he would have been today, he'd be in his 90s to have had that particular call sign he had. So most people would have thought I was a pirate if I'd have ever gone to use his call sign after, or applied to use his call sign afterwards. So I decided against it. But there you go. Leslie, you're not sure about the numbers, are you?
No, I'll tell you why. Humpty Dumpty was asked, what does a word mean? And his answer was, it can mean anything I want it to mean. And methinks the same applies to numbers. Let me sort of tell you why. I looked at this, and the first thing you have to remember is that the UK is like on a 5-year licensing. So we've got people coming into the hobby. We've got silent keys. We've got people that leave the hobby. But that license, and unless the relatives, in case of silent keys, in case the relatives contact Ofcom, that license is still active. And we really haven't got a full grip on the numbers. Yes, this is the raw data, but you need to put a lot more analysis into to find out actually, how many amateurs are actually active? How many have left the hobby? This doesn't sort of tell us any of that information. If you run a business, you get a young graduate to go away and number crunch and sort of tell me what I need to know. And sometimes you find out different things. And I think this is just the raw data. And because it's on a 5-year license as well, it's a snapshot of what's occurring now. I don't think it tells us any more than that without the analysis. That's just my take on it.
Yeah. Well, I suppose if we all had the numbers to crunch it, we could kind of make more sense of it. But, I'd quite like to see the breakdown. I thought that was a reasonable breakdown. With a grand total of 87,983, that sounded like quite a good number to me. But then we move on to the next news story, and it says UK amateur licenses, another way of looking at it. And Stuart Baker, G3RXQ, did an information request, freedom of information request to Ofcom regarding licensees, and they tell him that there are only 9,971 individual license holders, which kind of, I know. I'm going to leave you to the end, Leslie, because I can feel your your hair's going up the back of your neck, ready to jump on me on this one. But yeah, well, go on, go first then.
Yeah. No, I've got 3 licenses. Well, I've got 4 licenses actually. 3 of them are amateur radio licenses.
Yeah, but they're only talking about amateur radio licenses.
Yeah, I've got 3 amateur radio licenses.
Yeah, but what I was saying is the numbers. We don't understand the numbers. That's the problem. And my head.
Yes, exactly. That's my exact point.
Yeah, my quick maths in my head seem to think these 2 news stories don't balance. But Bill, what's your thoughts?
9971 is the number they gave out as the answer to his request for information. So you mentioned it as you're talking about the math. Round up to 10,000, so it's easy to work with. 10,000 is way less than 87,000. And let's just say, for argument's sake, exactly what you said. People have multiple licenses. Does it average out to 8? The numbers don't match in my mind, so there's a definite gap here in what these 2 numbers are telling us.
I mean, I'll give you one example. The word you use there is average. There's 5 different types of average.
Yes, that's actually true. There is 5 different kinds of averages. But my mind's spinning trying to make that number resolve with the grand total of 87,983. I'm not getting there.
Yeah, I was having trouble with the maths. Edmund, what's your thoughts?
I can't reconcile the numbers either. Even if we pretended that every single one of those 9,900 odd licensees became licensed after 2002, was it, when the system switched from the old Class A, Class B distinction to the current 3-tier system. Even if every one of those people held all 3 licenses simultaneously, which it is possible to do, although you can also surrender licenses. So, taking me as an example, when I reached the M0, the full license, I surrendered my M6 and my 2E0 licenses, partly to help Ofcom keep an accurate number of, or an accurate record of the number of radio amateurs in the country. So based on these conflicting figures here, that was obviously really worth doing, wasn't it? So if we assume that everybody's got 3 licenses, even if we included all the club licenses, special event station licenses, repeater licenses, contests, calls, all of those things, which we wouldn't include anyway because they're NOV's notice of variations on people's individual licenses rather than licenses in their own right per se. Even if you did all of that and took like the best case scenario that nobody had died, that everybody was active, that nobody had surrendered their license, even in that utopian scenario, I cannot see how you can possibly get anywhere close to that figure that Ofcom have provided. So if anybody from Ofcom is listening, please enlighten us. We'd love to know, wouldn't we?
We certainly would. We certainly would, Edmund. Matt, what's your thoughts?
Oh, well, I'll join. I'll try the number puzzle. So again, Freedom of Information Act request, like it's a state secret, but we got access. That's okay. Yeah, let's call it 10,000 is the number that we're talking about. So Ofcom can confirm the total number of individuals holding 1 or more current UK amateur radio licenses is, 9971. We'll call it 10,000. So those 10,000 individuals, and I don't know if it includes club calls and so forth. Let's just imagine it's just licenses per person. 10,000 people have 1 or more. So average number of licenses in that group. They probably have either 1, 2, 3. You can imagine 3 because I have 3. I came through the M6 2 Echo 0 and M0 hierarchy since 2002. So if those people have 3 licenses, then that's 30,000 licenses that you can count right there. 10,000 people have 3 licenses each. It's 30,000 licenses, and which means that of the 87,000 total licenses in circulation, which includes club calls and whatever else, and contest calls, I guess. Actually, I don't know. Yeah, maybe contest calls. Yeah, that leaves you something like 50,000 licenses that are attributable to single owners, or that person it's the only call that they have. So that seems reasonable. I don't know how many. I know a couple of G4s. How many licenses do they have? Because the G calls, the G0s to 8, came before or at a time where access to licenses was you did Morse or you didn't do Morse. Here's your license, and you can upgrade later on if you get Morse, I guess. But the hierarchy of foundation, intermediate, and full licensing, which I went through, enables you to have 3 licenses. You can accumulate the licenses and keep refreshing them in the 5-year period, and so you have a lot of licenses. So I can account for 30,000 licenses just from those 10,000 people that have more than one, and that makes sense because the M6's 13,777 M6s. So if everyone passed an M6 and then went on to intermediate and full license, they could accumulate, I guess. So I don't know. I don't think there's enough information to pick out exactly what's going on, but I can account for a chunk of those.
Yeah, I was going to say, Martin, that it's exactly like the office at work. Their database is only as good as the information we as individuals give them, and if we haven't updated our address or updated our license or relinquished a license or whatever, that affects the database. And this is, it has to be, organisations are basing the future of amateur radio on these numbers. So it has to be as up to date as possible. And if people aren't making sure that the information they provide to Ofcom is up to date, then the numbers can be anything.
So what you're saying is, and I'm consciously aware of our clean rating, rubbish in, rubbish out in a database, yeah?
Gigo, I think's the phrase.
There you go. And we managed to keep our clean rating. Well, so there you go, guys. Interesting discussion point. We don't know the answer, but it was worth looking at. The next news story, Voice of America Cap propagation prediction wheel returns. And
yippee!
Yeah, I thought you'd enjoy it, but the one I thought, when I saw this and put it into the news stories, I thought, Matthew's going to read this tomorrow. Matthew's going to sit at home and he's going to puzzle this out and he's going to get all excited about it. So, did you, Matt, or not?
I have spared a little bit of time to look at this. I will say that, my God, it's impressive. I think that's the second thing I could say. I have never used it, I have to say. Again, I'm still learning everything in the hobby, and there's always something new going on. It looks fantastic. I guess the excitement that Bill, and he'll comment in a moment, I'm sure, shared about this is really on something that I've observed as well, which is the usability in parts of it. It's just at a high level. You put in where you are, where you want to go, kind of the location you want to try to contact, what your power is, what your antenna shape is, all sorts of parameters. Hit go and it comes up with a prediction. Gives you a quality score between 0% and 100% of the quality of the circuit, the RF circuit to get to your destination. So on that point, it looks fantastic. When I start reading the sort of the summary page, the VOACAP overview commentary, there's so many nuances and parameters you can tweak. It looks fantastic, and it's not just built by a ham for hams. It seems to come out of some formal study all the way back to the 1940s about ionospheric propagation. It is a real professional tool, and it's out there. And my last hand over to Bill before he makes a comment is you can access the Fortran source code, and I wonder if Bill can actually play with Fortran these days. Go on then, Bill.
Oh yeah. I'm from the old school, so functions, procedures, subroutines, not objects, methods.
Yeah.
And so I'm from old school stuff. So yeah, Fortran 77, I got down cold. I actually never ran this when it was just the Fortran code on a like a command line machine or something like that. But yeah, this is very exciting. So what I do when I go home and I sit down in the shack, and you guys can just imagine the mess that my room is in, I have 3 tabs up all the time, and I just refresh them to see what's going on when I decide, before I turn the radio on, what I'm going to do. I have a propagation tab up, which has the current solar indices from WWV, and so, SFI, AAK. I also load up that bandconditions.com, because that kind of gives you that real-time, here's right now 40 is starting to creep up, and 20 and 30 are dropping down from when I looked at it a little earlier. That's kind of interesting. It also gives you the stabilities. So like last 10 minutes, everything's pretty stable, except 20 is a little less stable, so it's starting to drop out. And I have a VOACAP window up. Now, they dropped the wheel 6 or 8 months ago, maybe a little bit longer. And I use this all the time because I chase the DX. He loves me the DX stations, especially when they go out and do their little get a ship and they go out in the middle of nowhere and go to some place where people don't live and stuff. I really like that. So this gives a great prediction. This is not real time. Like some of the bandconditions.com stuff is real time, what's really going on based on measurements. This is a prediction based on the data of SFI and your A and K indexes, and you define your antennas, and you define your locations, you define your mode and power out. So for instance, right now at this minute, as I'm pulling up here, from my QTH at home, FN10, to London, using FT8 with 5 watts, I click on the magic little propagation wheel, and right now it looks like 20 meters is our best bet, with about 63% chance of a good path at 5 watts. 30 meters, 54%. And you can just see as it goes around the clock here, how the different bands pick up, 60 meters at 0400, that should be 85%, but I don't think anyone's going to be up. Likewise, it lets you, tweak the dials a little bit. So for instance, let's say I really want to work a station. I change it from FT8 to sideband. I change it from 5 watts to 100 watts. And it gives me a different graph to give me an idea of, okay, you want to do this. You want to work that path, that point-to-point path. Here's your best bet at the time that you're looking at. So, I use this thing like crazy with, most recently with the Baker Island DXpedition, because it's like I had no positive, idea in my head, when should I turn a radio on and try to get these guys on FT8 or something. And VOACAP gave me a good time to, okay, listen at these times on this band, and away you go. So, and the colored wheel that they have now is much easier to read than the chart. The chart, I think, gives you a little more precise detail. And they still left that in there for the people that like to use the chart. But those of us that like the wheel, it's back again. Very exciting.
Yeah, that's good news, Bill. That's good news that you use it. Hey, Leslie,
I'll just have to ask Bill. We have to set some time aside, and you have to show me how to use it properly.
Okay, not a problem. We can do a call, and it's very easy to use. Actually, I learned how to use it from the manual at the bottom, but I could show you in a few minutes. It's very easy to use, especially with this new layout they're using. It's responsive, so you don't have to hit buttons. It resizes with your screen. It probably would actually work on a phone now. So they've done a lot of work, and it's Jari OH6BG James HZ1JW, and I'm gonna mangle his name, Juno OH8 GLV are the three guys that I recall being the main guys behind VOACAP, and I'm sure they have a legion of other people in the background helping them.
Right, that's good. Leslie, what do you think on this?
Well, I think Bill's put it very, very well indeed. I think it's an absolute cracking tool. The other thing I was saying is it does use the traditional MUF charts, maximum usable frequency charts, which I was used to. But I did have a look at the wheel, and I actually found that very, very easy to use. I would really recommend, if people are into propagation, to play with this tool and just to see what it can do. And they're going to be, I can just see them all change this parameter and change that parameter. And this is what it's just about. Just experiment with it. It's great.
Right. Well, Edmund, we were talking earlier, and you and I are more casual operators on HF, aren't we? We just turn the radio on and see who's there, don't we? So, have you had a look at this?
I haven't, Martin, no. And as you've just said quite rightly, on the occasions that I turn my HF radio on, it's more a case of tuning around the bands and seeing who's there at whatever moments I can be on the air, rather than sitting down in advance and thinking to myself, right, in 2 days' time I'll be available between 2 and 3 in the afternoon, and I fancy working this particular country, right, what band do I need to go on to be able to do it? So it's I'm not sort of really the kind of operator that this is aimed at, I wouldn't have thought, but I will have a look.
Yeah, that's good stuff, though. It's good stuff. Right, moving on to our last news story. Ham radio operators play a key role in the triathlon. It's over in the States, and Bill, you know a bit more about this because they have to use amateur radio repeaters because it's quite a mega course, I believe.
Yeah, this particular one's from Montana, which I haven't been to yet, so I'm not exactly sure how the geography is out there, but I can tell you from the events that we have around here, I live in a mountainous area, which is why I do things like SOTA, because there are hilltops to go to. And in a lot of these spots, when they have these large events, and this case was a race, we have races around here and they have different events, same thing. They need amateur radio operators to just provide basic communications for them as they run their events and stuff, because there's hills, there's dales, there's everything in between, and in a lot of cases you just need some experience to understand, okay, I can go from here to there, but I can't go from here to there, this different direction, because of the large mountains. So they end up just asking the local radio clubs to help them out. Luckily, most clubs do. So it's a really nice story in general, and this is one of hundreds of these stories I run across every few months. So there is a lot of activity over here with clubs getting involved with various events and helping out with the public service.
Yeah, this is great fun. Edmund, what do you think?
Well, amateur radio has several advantages that we know about already, doesn't it? And one of them, I suppose, is that unlike if this was being done on commercial frequencies with a PMR repeater, that kind of thing, by using amateur radio, if you were in a location where the local amateur repeater isn't so strong, you do have the option of going on to simplex as well. Or you could run a simplex channel in parallel, sort of for talkback almost. So I can see the advantages of ham radio doing this. And as we know, mobile phone coverage can be very patchy. I mean, where I'm speaking to you from right now, in my little village, I mean, it's not in the middle of nowhere, but mobile reception here can be very touch and go at times, and even if there is mobile infrastructure, all you need is enough spectators all trying to make or receive phone calls or send text messages at the same time for the mobile system cell phone structure to fall over. So really good use of amateur radio, and it'll look good in the public's eyes as well, won't it? So very pleased to read about this.
Yeah, I totally agree with you on that. Matthew, what's your thoughts?
nothing more than what's already been said, I'm afraid. I think it's just another element of the hobby getting a bit of visibility with the public, doing the right thing. It's a positive story.
Yeah, I agree with you. Leslie, would you like to say something on this one?
Yes, indeed. Well, it raises the profile of amateur radio, which is a good thing. The other thing that sort of caught my interest is when you were talking about the topography and using the different equipment for different links. There was a thing we did on Google for line of sight communication, and we were actually working out the path, whether a path was viable, not using Google Maps. That may be of interest to people, that are doing that type of operation, to see if they've got coverage. It's a thing, but overall, I think this is a good story.
Yeah. Well, I agree with you all on that one. So that's good news. Well, that's the end of the news stories. Let's have a quick walk around the table quickly and find out what you've all been up to. Bill, what have you been playing radio with over the last few weeks?
I actually have 2 months worth of stuff here, and I'm just going to hit him real quick. We had a 13 colony special event station around the American Independence holiday. I got all 13 again, 5 sideband, 7 FT8, and 1 very, very, very slow Morse contact with K2D. Thank you for slowing down at the op, because I was the guy coming in at like 7 words a minute. Don't get me going on how bad that went. I did cash in all my Logbook of the World clicks for DXCC Digital, worked all states RTTY, worked all states digital, and worked all state mixed. Sunday at Barnsdome 3.0 is Antenna Mania 2018. Yeah, I got done with all the antenna projects. I've been waiting for my round to it to do all summer. 40-meter Wyndham is down. 80-meter Wyndham's up in its place. The 40-meter Wyndham is the one I built after Hurricane Floyd in September 1999. So I had a wire antenna. It lasted 19 years, guys. That's remarkable. New one is a Radio Waves 80-meter off-center fed dipole, aka a Wyndham. I also finally got around to replacing my center conductor on the 160-meter. Now it's back in a G5RV configuration. I got the rope up to about 50 foot in the tree, so that's up higher. The next thing I'm going to do with that one is I need to order some more ladder line, because then I'm going to switch that one back over to a doublet. So that'll end up being a doublet at some point. So I spent too many weekends on that. I did work IS0CDS Sal from Sardinia on FT8. That's a new one for me. Dan and I both have the same FT8 shirts. I don't know if you saw the pictures online I posted on social media, but Jeff KE9V sold some shirts saying FT8 ham radio without all the jibber jabber. I thought that was hilarious, so I bought the shirt. And the last thing I wanted to highlight is I'm trying a new mode called FT8 Call. It's FT8 where it's a keyboard to keyboard mode. Latest beta, well, it's pretty much alpha, is out, and so I've been hanging around on 14.080 listening to that. In fact, I ended up having a 40-minute QSO with VA3 OSO about 3 weeks ago on FT8 Call. And we just, it was like a PSK31 conversation, only way, 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 way slower. But it got through the noise, and we were both QRP. So that was really neat. So it's been a busy couple weeks.
Yeah, certainly sounds it, Bill. Certainly sounds like you've been having fun. All right, Matthew, what have you been up to radio-wise?
Well, in the shadow of Bill, definitely. My goodness. I have been busying my weekends building a rotator. So I built myself an antenna rotator and hope to finish the controller this weekend. So basically, my usual appetite is to work with wire antennas, as Bill was talking about earlier, for HF work, and you set them up and they kind of stick. That's what the direction is, kind of how big your garden is. But little bit of time, with little contests. We did the club contest, with Practical Wireless 2-meter contest in June, but to learn more CW, and I thought maybe using 2-meter SSB rig, CW or all mode rig, would help with that as well. I wanted to get into smaller antennas, Yagis, and my mast doesn't rotate, the push-up mast that I have. So I kind of fell into the idea of getting a rotator, and I looked at manual ideas, manual rotators, kind of pulley system or something. In the end, I found it was much easier to build something electrical with a DC motor, and so I finished that just last weekend, the mechanics of it. I brought it down to the club on Monday night to show you, Martin, and the rest of the guys. And as I say, I'm just going to finish the controller, which is a store-bought or online purchased little DC motor PWM controller to give me forwards, backwards, fixed stop, slow speed, fast speed, that kind of thing. So that's kept me busy. Otherwise, a couple of trips to HMS Belfast, one coming up probably on the day this recording is released. And I've got my Imperial War Museum volunteer pass waiting for me on board the ship, so that I'll be able to fully be able to participate in the Belfast and collect the keys to the Bridge Wireless office. And I'm pleased about that.
Yeah, all goes well on that one, Matt, and that sounds fun. And yeah, I saw your rotator, and I'm not going to talk too much about it because just in case you want to whet people's appetites at a later date, I know you're going to potentially do a club talk on it as well. So that's certainly an interesting device. Edmund, what have you been up to?
Well, during the first full week in August, I went on holiday to Nottingham, and for reasons I won't go into here, I decided to try to travel as light as possible. So I didn't take any HF gear with me, but I did take 2 handhelds, both of them completely unlocked and wide-banded, by the way, in the finest tradition. So I had the Wouxun KG UV6D for 2 meters and 70 sems, and I had the 699 Echo for the 4 meter band, and I just had a couple of whips for 4 meters quarter wave and 2 meters 70 sems collinear to go on top of the car, because somebody very kindly fitted a boot mount to my car the week before. Thank you, Martin.
Oh, you'll get me into trouble, won't you, if Paul ever finds out?
No, it's fine. So, the place we were staying at was about 200 feet above sea level, and I had lots of contacts over the week, got well into double figures, didn't go through any repeaters at all, the whole lot were simplex, and they were all random QSOs, nothing prearranged specifically on social media. So that was good. I don't think I didn't knowingly work any ICQ podcast listeners, but if I did and didn't realise it, then thank you for working me whilst I was on holiday. And the highlight was, apart from all the 2 meter F contacts, I called CQ on 433.500 70 centimeters and 70.450 on 4 meters, and in both cases I got a reply. So there are people out there listening. So if you fancy having a go, get yourself up high somewhere and call CQ. Height at, I know everybody probably knows this anyway, but I'll say it again, height at VHF and UHF is far more important than the power that you run. So even though I was only on batteries on handhelds, I was having contacts several tens of miles away. So that was very good. And also a special mention to Abdul, Mike 0 November Papa Tango, who kindly met up with me one lunchtime whilst I was up there, and his hospitality was first rate. So again, Abdul, if you're listening, nice to meet you last week. Looking ahead, my favourite amateur radio weekend of them all happens on the 3rd weekend in August. That's the International Lighthouse and Lightship Weekend. Now, this podcast comes out on the Sunday, so day 2 of that event. But if you hear it in time, I would encourage you to get on the air and see if you can work a few lighthouses here and there. Here in Sussex, there are 3 on air that I know of. There's my local one, Shoreham, Golf Bravo 8 Sierra Lima. Further eastwards along the coast, Newhaven Lighthouse is on the air, Golf Bravo 0 November Lima. I think the call sign is from memory. And then last but not least, Beachy Head is due to be on the air for the first time in a couple of years. And Bob, Mike 3 Delta Papa Quebec, is travelling down specially from his home QTH of Bedford. So he's putting a few miles in to activate Beachy Head. But worldwide, there are roughly 410 registered, which is about the same level it was at on this equivalent day in 2017. And it's the 21st edition of the event in its current form, and the 25th anniversary of the event, which very quickly evolved into the Lighthouse Weekend. So a couple of significant anniversaries. Going to be there the whole weekend, camping, going to do HF mainly from Shoreham Lighthouse. We'll also do VHF locally, and I'm going to try to get on a couple of the FM satellites, if I can manage it. Also be transmitting Whisper and APRS throughout as well. So can't wait. I've already started packing my suitcase and hope to work as many of you as possible from the Golf Bravo 8 Sierra Lima gazebo at Shoreham Lighthouse.
So it sounds like you're going to be a very, very, very busy boy. I'll comment a bit more on that in a minute. But Leslie, what have you been up to?
Oh, apart from being overworked, as you do today. Right, what have I been up to? A couple of things. I had a 808 radio that decided it was no longer going to work with me, and it got totally scrambled software. So last couple of weeks, I've been trying to get it to work again, but I don't think I'm going to succeed in that. I've actually got a replacement. Was it an 80? It's an 898S, which is a sort of VHF UHF version. In case I can't get it to work, well, I think it's had it. It's that very, very hot weekend, and I think it baked in the tent, which didn't do it any good whatsoever. What else have we been working on? Also been working on some batteries, and I've made some rather expensive mistakes on batteries. So what can I say? These things happen, and I've just got to shrug my shoulders and get some other batteries that will do the job. That's correct battery type for the correct charger. But that was one of my mistakes. It happens. Over to you, Martin.
Yeah, unfortunately, mate, it does happen. Occasionally we get the wrong thing, but sounds like you've all been having fun. Well, I've been decorating a room, of which my shack will eventually go back into, and I'm now at the stage where I need to run the aerials in. I've got the room built. A number of the aerials got taken down last year, so hopefully, by the time we get into September, I should have a live shack again, which would be quite good. I also changed my job. The boss lady at work where I was working decided to pick a fight and lost. In the nicest possible way, I decided I wasn't going to take her bullying anymore, and I explained a few facts of life to her, and we've now moved on. I did go to the flight refueling rally down in Dorset last weekend. Unfortunately, it was a total and utter washout. I would suggest only 25% of the traders turned up. It poured with rain. It was in a field. It poured with rain. And nobody was getting anything out because they didn't want it wet, which is understandable. And in fairness, I only bought a couple of things. Soda Beams were there. Richard from Soda Beams was in one of the inside locations, and I bought the power connector for the FT817 because every time I try and do satellites, the power connector drops out the back. So he's got an adapter which goes to power poles. I bought one of those, and I bought a few of his offcuts of plastic which he sells 10 for £1, and there's a few that I can probably make dipole centers from, and a couple of bits and pieces there. So that was a total waste of time. Took Mrs. B with me because I also promised to do something else on that day, and I kind of made up my mind now, from now on, if I do a rally, the rally has to have something else happening in the area at the same time. Because if you go all the way to a rally and it's a washout, you've got to have something else. So I took Mrs. B to Monkey World in Dorset, not amateur radio related, obviously. An interesting afternoon, still wet, still miserable weather-wise, but a very pleasant afternoon. And you go and see. It's a monkey sanctuary. It's not. They're not there to perform for you. They're there to be looked after and, bring them back from some of the horrific stories that they've rescued them from. So that was quite good. I'd like to thank each and every one of the listeners that published on Facebook wishing Colin and I a happy birthday. Yes, Colin does actually share exactly the same day as me. For my birthday, so we both had a birthday a couple of days ago. And Edmund, we're on HMS Belfast on Sunday. Unusually, it's a Sunday rather than a Saturday, so we may look out for you on the lighthouse and lightships, and hopefully we'll get a contact with you on that one. So that's what I've been up to. That's what's coming up, and I think we've all been pretty busy. With that in note, I'd like to say thank you very much to all of you. Mr. Bill Barnes, N3JIX, Mr. Leslie Butterfield G0CIB, Mr. Matthew Nassau M0NJX, and Mr. Edmund Spicer M0MNG. I'll put you in Scotland here. Mr. Edmund
you've moved me to Scotland again, haven't you?
I have. And Mr. Edmund Spicer M0MNG. 7 for all.
Cheerio, Martin.
The ICQ Amateur Ham Radio Podcast, serving the amateur ham radio community fortnightly since 2008.
And now it's time to have a look at the news in brief with me, Colin M6BOY. A couple of CubeSats have been deployed. Actually, 3 have been deployed for the International Space Station this month. These are Birds 2 CubeSats. And they have APRS digi-repeaters, which are now online. So there's 3 satellites, Bhutan 1, Maya 1, and UITM Sat 1 will transmit 30 minutes, or start transmitting 30 minutes after their deployment, using Morse code on 77s. They all use the same frequency, 437.375 megahertz. And we've got the call signs, etc. on the ICQpodcast.com website for you to check out. So if you're a satellite chaser, certainly one for you to check out from there. In Australia, there's been surveys done by the WAA, which have requested the input of the licensees and the general public in the changes that make to amateur radio. They received approximately 500 responses, of which that's about 4% of the licensed amateurs in Australia. But more importantly is support for general principles of change were very high, along with changes to all levels of the 3 stages of licensing over there. One of the main calls was to increase the power given to foundation licensees to 50 watts. Probably very important, obviously, with rural locations, etc. in Australia, why this would gather so much interest in the population. So, of course, this is encouraging the WA to start looking at implementing their change, as they have a 5-year spectrum outlook, which they're working on with the ACMA, the governing body there in America. So, again, we'll put some links on this on ICQpodcast.com for people to check out a bit more. And we welcome Paraguay to the 60 metre club. And they've been released secondary allocation on 5351.5 to 5366.5 with a maximum power of 25 watts EIRP. So say congratulations Paraguay for joining us all on 60 metres. Well, now we head over to our features episode, PiStar 12 months on. Hope you enjoy.
And now what you've all been waiting for, this episode's feature from the ICQ podcast. Well, hi guys, and welcome to this episode's feature. We're going back to talk to the guys at PiStar. About a year ago, and we had the first chat with them, but a phenomenal amount has happened in the last 12 months. We have with us Mr. Adrian Craig, M0GLJ. Hi, Adrian.
Good afternoon, Martin. How are you?
I'm ducking and diving as always, Adrian. And the developer of the piece of software, Mr. Andrew Taylor, MW0MWZ. So nice to have you here today, both of you. And Andrew, probably yourself, because you're the developer. Adrian tells me you've been very busy. What have you been up to?
It's been a roller coaster of a ride, Martin. It's been a really good. It's been nearly a year since the last conversation we had with you, and it's been quite a full year too. Back then, I was actually listening to the podcast from last time, and just going back over what we talked about then, and just to give you some stats to show you how things have moved on, we've made 11 minor versions in that time, so almost one a month, pretty much, since the last time we spoke. Our Facebook support group has grown massively from 1,200 users back then to now over 6,000. We've also added a forum too, and the forum has over 1,400 members already. And so much has changed, honestly. There have been so many additions that we've made, Martin. It's been a very full year.
Yeah, it certainly sounds like it. And I mean, I run Fusion at home or mobile, and I've certainly heard people talking about your product. It's very lively, and I know through some of the gateways they come into the Fusion network, but they've certainly talked well about your product.
Yeah, Fusion has had much expanded support in the last 11 months. Not only in the base for the MMDVM and YSF gateway that was already there. So that gateway now has FCS support. So we're now able to connect to the FCS reflectors. Thank you, Jonathan, for that. That's been a great bonus. But not only that, another developer, Andy, who typically works on MMDVM HAT firmware, has also taken up charge of making some extra gateways for us. So we have some cross-mode support. So you're now able to get into Fusion with a DMR radio and out from Fusion to DMR or NXDN, which you may not have heard of yet, and P25. So we're now able to actually cross over modes at your PiStar without even getting into a network first. It's really exciting times, honestly.
Yeah, certainly sounds it. And I must admit, when I contacted Adrian to re-go with this, one of our other presenters, Mr. Bill Barnes in the States, N0JIX, he was very, very excited. He had your product installed and he's just getting into DMR. And he said what a great product it was, and I was about to do a review. And I said that I was actually talking to you guys. So it's worldwide, as you know, and getting really good reviews.
I think a lot of that comes from the fact that we're very ready to embrace new things. Whether that's a new language pack to make the software available to a country who doesn't speak English or doesn't even have a Latin alphabet, or whether it's accepting of new features, whether it's features that Adrian and I feel that there's a need for, and sometimes when there isn't. So in the last 11 months, to give you some idea of some of the major highlights, we've added support for extra different ARM processor boards. So not only the Raspberry Pi, but also the Nano Pi. There's an Orange Pi board that's supported as well.
There's the Odroid. The Odroid's incredible, so powerful in such a small box. We added additional support for getting your Pi onto the internet more easily. So USB tethering with a cell phone. Just plug the USB cable in, turn on internet connection sharing on the phone. Whether it's Android or iPhone, that pretty much just works. It's very, very simple. New mode support. So as I mentioned just now, NXDN has now arrived. NXDN it's very similar to P25. It's not quite the same thing, but they do share quite a bit. In order to make the out-of-box setup more simple, we added a neat feature where if your Pi either doesn't know about any Wi-Fi networks, or it does know about some but none of those are available, it will actually make its own hotspot for you, and then you can connect to it even without it being cabled to your router, and you can do some setup and be online and ready to go fairly quickly, and for the most part without much pain, honestly. I mean, that's really the point of PiStar. It always has been.
Yeah. Well, as I say, if anything's difficult, then people sometimes walk away from it. And I know that at times some of the things I see, not necessarily only in amateur radio, but if it's too difficult, I can't be bothered. So I think your user interface is the good thing about your product, is it is easy to use, isn't it?
It's an interesting mixture of trying to keep it easy to use, but trying to add in those killer features that people want. There are always going to be features that we don't have, and we don't have them because they're just too complicated. It's not that we can't do them, it's being able to add a feature in a way that makes it simple to use, to bring the power to everybody. So, for example, we added a feature in the last 11 months that actually speaks directly with the Brandmeister API. That enables you to control the talk groups that your PiStar connects to from the PiStar dashboard. So you don't need to log into Brandmeister to make the changes. You can do them from the dashboard. You can drop QSOs. You can connect to a reflector. You can add and remove talk groups. That's a really powerful thing. But being able to do that from the dashboard and make it look and feel simple, that's been a major win. The other thing that we added, though, is we're finding a lot of repeater keepers are starting to use PiStar on their repeaters. So we also added a command line version of the same tool. And that allows you to script when talk groups are available, when they're added, when they're removed, dropping QSOs, all of the same features you can run from the command line. And if you can do it from the command line, you could do it from cron, so you can have schedules. And now you can have talk groups that appear and disappear based on a schedule. That makes all of these things really powerful to use. You know, really giving people the features and the support and the tools to do more things than honestly we could expect. You know, more things that we could even imagine.
So I suppose at the moment it's only limited by our imaginations, pretty much, what you're doing. There's more and more people doing innovation on some of these modes, and at the moment I suppose digital modes are starting to quieten down a bit in that you're not getting hundreds of new modes coming out all the time, but it's nice to have it all in one box, I'd suggest.
It is nice to have it in one box. There are definitely some modes that we could have that we don't have, and they may or may not show up in time. What I'm most interested in and what I'm most proud of is that we're right in the middle of bringing the modes together. So we're no longer saying, well, if you've got a fusion radio or you've got a DMR radio, you're now stuck with that mode. You know, now that Andy's brought in his cross mode support, where you can jump from the RF side with, say, a DMR radio, for example, and now you can come out on a YSF or an FCS reflector. And you find a lot of the times FCS reflectors, for example, and some of the YSF ones actually cross over onto the Yaesu YSX network as well. So you're now suddenly, with a single radio, you know, you're opening the door to other modes that are not native to the radio, but you didn't need to buy any new hardware for that. It just arrived overnight in an update. That's a really wonderful place to be.
Yeah, I agree with you, because that was always my big bugbear at the start of digital radio in amateur radio, because we started off with D-Star, and I bought a D-Star radio, albeit it's committed Harry-Carry and is no more, or very likely to ever survive again. Moved on, I had DMR, and I worked on DMR as a PMR engineer, and now running Fusion, and I'm thinking, well, I've got 3 systems that didn't connect, 3 completely different systems, and I've noticed that certainly on the Fusion, there's gateways between, and I'm sure they may be using your product to gateway between the different systems. And once we're getting the gateways between the different systems, and it means we can all talk together. And if you bought the wrong version of digital radio years ago, it's not a phenomenal white elephant sitting in the room that you've paid a lot of money for and can't use, I would suggest. That's
exactly it. And it also means that the pressure has been reduced on trying to find the winning solution, because there doesn't need to be one. You know, we're now in a position where if you have your Yaesu Fusion radio, you can use Yaesu Fusion. You can also use DMR and NXDN and P25. You know, that's one radio with 4 modes. And likewise, if you have your DMR radio, you don't only have DMR, you have the Brandmeister network, you have the Phoenix or DMR Plus network. You've also got the gateway modes to NXDN and to Fusion. And by extension, all the things that are available to Fusion again are still available too. The one that we have a little trouble with, and I won't say that it's really that we have some trouble with it, there aren't any real gateway modes between D-Star and the other networks. And that's because you really need to do hardware transcoding to get between D-Star and anything else. The crossover modes that we have now, the reason that they work is because the underlying data that's inside the packets that go across the network is actually the same. And you just wrap it up differently. Andy's code is clever, because what he does is he unwraps it and rewraps it in the new format before it goes into the network. And that's how those crossover modes work. So they're not actually transcoding. To get backwards and forwards with D-Star, you do need to do transcoding. Although, you know, we have XLX reflectors that allow DMR to D-Star. So there are hardware reflectors out there that do the transcoding for you. So there are still plenty of options, and the idea that you don't have to worry quite as much as you once did about which radios you buy and what access to what hardware you have, and, of course, what repeaters you have nearby. That's much less of a problem now than it once was.
Yeah, certainly is. And like I say, it was always the problem which digital mode you go, because as what's in your area. Now, I'm actually quite lucky here, because I'm about 6 miles away from a DMR repeater, which I can work easily on a handy, and I'm also about half a mile away from a Fusion repeater. So I'm probably lucky sitting here in South London, but other parts of the country obviously not as well served. And let's say by using your product, it certainly helps, doesn't it?
It certainly does. It certainly does. And it's not only the software innovation that's happening now as well. There's still plenty of innovation going on with the hardware. There's some really interesting projects that are coming to fruition, some of which are all-encompassing projects where they have a one-box solution that has a bunch of hardware in it, and they're even running PiStar on the single-board computer that's in the box, to the modem manufacturers that are making the hats that you stick on top of the Pi. Those guys are putting in new features all the time, adding new support for different modes. There are now duplex as well as simplex boards. So whereas previously you ran either simplex or half duplex, where you ran split, but you could only transmit or receive, we're now at the point where there is hardware that's full duplex, that's still small enough to fit on a Raspberry Pi, but has independent transmit and receive radios. I mean, there's incredible amounts of innovation going on right now, and it's great to be in the middle.
Yeah. And you mentioned earlier, I mean, initially this was for a Raspberry Pi, but you mentioned earlier there are other boards coming out with more power. Certainly going to make your life easier with all the extra features, I'd have thought.
we're trying to maintain support for everything. So currently, you can still run PiStar right on the original Raspberry Pi, which is quite underpowered by today's standards. However, we're soon to be making some changes which will make it even better running it on the older hardware. At the moment, it takes a little while. So if you try and make a configuration change, as the software rewrites all the configuration files and sorts them all out, that currently does take quite a few seconds, and you really notice that you press the apply button. And I suspect that, honestly, that won't improve very much. But we do have some plans to improve the dashboard to reduce the CPU load on those low-end boards. The one that I alluded to earlier was the Odroid, the Odroid XU4. That is a monster of a single-board computer for its size. Very powerful, has loads of additional CPU performance. We don't get close to needing all of that, but it's a very good board.
Right. That sounds good. So, lots of other developments. Any other developments you want to tell me before we move on to what you might be up to soon?
The most important ones that have come along recently, we added support for the brand new Raspberry Pi 3B Plus. It still has its own beta image currently because of the changes that the Raspberry Pi Foundation made and how they made them in order to support that board. PiStar is still built on quite an old version of the operating system. It's still updated, but it's getting a bit long in the tooth. Major changes that we've added just recently, we added POCSAG support, so that's for paging on the amateur network. Some of you may remember back in the 80s we all used to carry pagers, and some into the 90s, myself included. But these days pagers are kind of dwindling and disappearing. And in fact, in the UK, we're down to a single pager network. But now we have paging available on the amateur network. It's not encrypted, so it's a mode that we can use. And if you're using MMDVM-based hardware, like many people are, it's a firmware upgrade, an update on the PiStar dashboard, and suddenly you have paging support. And that's part of the DAPnet, D-A-P-N-E-T, DAPnet. So if you have a look at the DAPnet guys and see what they're up to, hampager.de, I think, is their website. And you can go and register an ID and register a transmitter ID. And before you know it, you can be set up and able to transmit pages too.
Right. Well, as I say, a long time since I've had a pager, but I didn't realise amateurs were using pagers. That's my ignorance there, Andrew. But it's another mode, isn't it? So, you could suddenly find people getting very excited with the POCSAG, whereas they got very excited with FT8 anyway, didn't they?
Well, this is the thing. There are so many things that we could do that we haven't been doing. And it's not because we didn't want to. In some cases, it's because we needed new hardware, we needed special software. But as people talk with each other and work together more, and this is one of the things that happens with PiStar, is it does help bring people together. I won't say that paging support was actually related to us, but as it arrived in MMDVM, as Jonathan pulled it in, I think he was working with Florian, possibly. But as those guys, came together and wrote the software and made it possible, we then brought it into PiStar very quickly. And the interesting side effect for that was when I went off to try and buy a pager that was actually going to work on the UK 70 centimeters band allocation, the company that makes them had sold out because so many PiStar users had placed orders.
Yeah, well, that just shows you how popular it could be. So moving forward, I mean, obviously, this is an ongoing project in your part. Any ideas where you may be going in the next 12 months?
Of course, if there are any major new features in the MMDVM software stack, we want to bring those in. There is another piece of code that Jonathan writes that we do already make use of. So we already use IRC DDB Gateway and D-Star Repeater, both. They're also options on PiStar. He's written some updates for those to enable terminal mode on the new ICOM radios, and we do want to pull that in. But in order to do so, we're actually holding that change until we upgrade to the newer version of the base operating system because of the couple of changes that we need to support that. So that's really where we're going next. It's doing an upgrade to the base operating system and moving up to version 4. Something I've been promising for about a year, funnily enough, and for various reasons, we keep putting it off because we keep putting new features into the current build. And we'll have to maintain the 2 for at least a short time. And that's not really something that I'm looking forward to. But we're getting to the point where there aren't really any choices, and we will have to move forwards on those. The other major thing that we need to bring in, that I've also been promising for some time, Brandmeister actually have some nice security features which allow individual users to have unique passwords for connecting their hotspots to the network. And that should be fairly simple for us to bring in. And I keep avoiding it just because I haven't quite had the time to sit and sort out how I'm going to make it work. But that's also on the cards to get that done too.
Yeah, well, I know you do this as a labour of love, and, Adrian did get you. I remember him saying that he convinced you to release this to the public, and once you did, you literally probably been full-time on this all the time, haven't you, Andrew?
It certainly soaks up all the free time we have. That's very true, yes. Although I will say it is remarkably rewarding too. It's great to hear people talking about the work that you do. It's even better when they say thank you, and it's just incredible to see the uptake and the usage. I've been looking at the stats on our update server, and we push so much traffic from that one server. It's just incredible. And it really fills me with pride to see people using what we do.
Yeah. Well, my son Colin says there are creators and consumers, and there are not as many creators as consumers, which is quite rightly so, because otherwise everybody would be creating, nobody would be using. But like yourselves, we're creators as well, and it's good to hear from you. What's Adrian up to? Adrian, do you want to tell us what you've been up to?
I've pretty much, being the marketing director, I've pretty much come back to keeping an eye on the Facebook group and the new forums that we've got up and running. We found that the Facebook group, we were getting repeat questions. Obviously the search bar within the group is underutilised, so we thought we'd set up forums and split it up into different categories, so it makes it a lot easier to find support. I've pretty much come back to doing that for the time being. The marketing side of it seems to have taken off on its own and doesn't need much prodding from me, but sort of come back to a support role, so to speak.
All right, mate. Yeah, sounds good. And I'll say it's good that things are going well for you. Well, Andrew, once again, I know you told us last time, but just to remind our listeners, if they want to get hold of yourself or your software, what's the best way of doing it?
The best way is to Google PiStar, either as Pi-Star or PiStar without the dash. Doesn't matter which way you Google it, you'll find our website in the first 1 or 2 hits at the top of the Google search. If you want to go straight there, PiStar.uk without the dash. And the links to the Facebook group and the forum are both available from there. And you can find us on Facebook, Pi-Star support group, and ask to join, answer the questions, and we let you straight in.
That sounds good. So before we close up, I reckon that the amount of development you're doing, we'll be talking again in about a year's time. You'll be telling me all the new features you put in since this one. But as I say, I'd like to do this again in a while, if that's okay with you.
I think we'd really enjoy it. I mean, it's very, very difficult for us to forecast what the year's going to bring. I know I tried to make some predictions before the last time we spoke to you, and I never could have predicted the things that have happened. So I'm not going to try and predict anything this time. We'll just carry on as we are, add in the new features as they come along, and just try and keep it fun for everybody. That's what it's all about.
Yeah, I understand. And just on a side note for yourself, when Colin said to me, how about we have a go at podcasting, I think I agreed to do 10. Not 10 years. We've just done 10 years. So you can't, if you've got a product that works, and the labour of love that you're enjoying, then you'll enjoy it, Andrew.
Absolutely, and congratulations on the 10 years. That's really good.
Yeah, thanks for that. Right, well, I'd like to say 73s to the pair of you, and we'll catch up with you in a while.
Thank you, Martin. It's been a great pleasure.
Yeah, it's been a wild ride, and looking forward to the next 12 months.
Keep your amateur ham radio podcast advert free by donating less than a length of coax. Visit www.icqpodcast.com/donate now. For all the news, links and information, visit www.icqpodcast.com.
Well, welcome back, everybody, and great there to hear the update on the PiStar project, and 12 months on from our last chat with the guys. It's good to see that the project is evolving along nicely. Well, as always, we'd like to sum up our end of the show here by thanking again our donors, our monthly and annual subscription donors. Thank you very much for helping us pay our way. And we'd also like to thank as well Charles Riley, Golf for Juliet Quebec X-Ray as well, for his one-off donation. As always, we'd ask you to consider us by visiting www.icqpodcast.com/donate, where anything you send away is always greatly appreciated. Well, we've had some feedback over the last few weeks, so we've grouped a few bits up together for you. Starting off with a quick note here saying this came in originally from Varna from Bulgaria, Lima Zulu 4 Delta Juliet, originally G1 Romeo Hotel Bravo in the UK, and it says, nice podcast, really enjoys it, and many thanks for producing the show. So you're more than welcome. It's great to have you there on board. Now, some feedback on some of our recent shows here, Dad. We start off one here from Michael Staggs, November Oscar 2 Yankee, in relation to the great FT8 debate, and he's popped some comments in for us on the website. And basically, we're talking about he's made a little over 1,000 FT8 contacts. He knows people who've made 3,000 to 4,000 or more, but he's personally a bit more selective in who he contacts, but responds to anybody, etc. His DXCCT took him about 8 months. He's worked all the states on 80, 40, 30, 20 and 17 meters, and say he's working away nicely. He's doing PSK 31 and RITI as well, and I say don't find if he doesn't find anything on the digital bands, or if there's a contest going on, he may head across to a single sideband. So this really follows on really from the conversation you guys had at the time, wasn't it? Really, that the strength and the growth in the FT8 and the digital modes, really, doesn't it?
Yeah, it certainly does. I was talking to Bill in this episode, and he was mentioning there's a new version of FT8 come out, and it's in alpha at the moment, I think it is, or just about to go to beta. But it will allow you, instead of to just have a remote confirmation of contact between each other, it'll allow you to actually do a keyboard-to-keyboard contact. And Bill was saying that it's a bit like doing a PSK 31 call, only a little bit slower, but it was right down in the noise. And he said he's been experimenting with the alpha version of that. And I know Tim, who joins us on the HMS Belfast, he's big into FT8 as well. It's one mode I've not played with. I keep meaning to, but there's so many things that I need to do in amateur radio, and this is one of them, but it's not at the top of my list yet at the moment, Colin.
We need to find you some more time. That's what we need to do. But, you'll get there. So next comment here, and this follows on from the last episode. And we've got an ex-British expat, Martin Sol, who was originally Golf for Uniform Quebec Foxtrot. He's now licensed in Thailand as Hotel Sierra Zero Zulu Echo Delta. And we were talking there about the number of licensed amateur radio operators in Thailand. And he's dropped us a note to give us a bit more information. He comments that the large number of apparent radio amateurs is distorted to some extent by the novice license also being issued to volunteer radio stations. These are granted Thailand novice privileges and do take the novice exam, but it is a very simple operator certificate and limits the holder to 10 watts on channelized 2 meter FM operation only. During a period when amateur radio was completely banned in Thailand, this was found to be an acceptable alternative and has remained despite a slight relaxation in extremely tightly regulated conditions. The very greatly majority of volunteer radio novice CBers have no specific amateur radio interest, and its use is restricted to emergency and volunteer scenarios when he thinks roughly about maybe 1% or less would move forward to intermediate or advanced class amateur radio licenses. The recent drop in numbers is mostly due to the increased use of social media and other networks of volunteer radio, so in time the use of globally acceptable norms of amateur radio systems may return. Intermediate tests were not held for many years until the availability of Thai nationals to take US exams provoked the change. It was considered somewhat embarrassing that a Thai national could become a licensed ham in the US and yet not be able to apply for a license in their own country, while some foreigners were able to become reciprocal license holders in Thailand based on similar licenses in their home country. Further change came when His Royal Majesty the King Rama IX passed away, as the only advanced license at the time was considered auspicious to use at that moment to permit the lost my train of thought. Permit advanced licenses to be issued more widely. Reciprocal agreements with Thailand are made on a government bilateral basis, and there's no acceptance or reliance on SEPTA or the HAREC in any matters relating to amateur radio in Thailand. Strict rules still govern the import and use of radio equipment, which is still perceived to be of a tactical nature despite the proliferation of other communication media. He says he would urge anyone with an interest in the fascinating and indeed at times the history of amateur radio in Thailand to read an account out at qsl.net /RAST/history.html. So Martin, really thank you for giving us a report there from Thailand and fleshing out more information on that. And certainly doesn't that show the difference in cultures and perceptions of radio in different countries there in Thailand that I'm sure none of us would have thought of without Martin's feedback.
Yeah, certainly, and that's the reason sometimes we pick some of these stories, because certainly the national societies pick stories that are pretty much pertinent to them, and on ICQ when we pick stories to discuss, they're discussion points, and in many ways your feedback like this is great, because although we weren't technically right on every issue, it's nice just to see that you're giving us far more of a flavour. And I think, Colin, this episode there is 2 articles from Ofcom in the UK about UK licences, and we debated how the numbers just don't add up. So I'm expecting a little bit of feedback from that one as well.
Exactly. Well, Martin, if you hear of any new developments and news stories from Thailand, please feel free to give us a shout and let us know. And of course, that invite is open to everybody who might be hearing bits and pieces going on around the world that you think listens to the ICQ podcast will be interested in. So you can go along to the ICQ podcast website, click on the contact us section and drop us a quick mail there, and keep us updated what's going on. Well, let's wrap this show up there, Dad. So we'd like to thank Leslie, Golf 0 Charlie India Bravo, Edmund, Mike 0 Mike November Golf, Matthew, Mike 0 November Juliet X-Ray, and Bill, November 3 Juliet India X-Ray for joining on the round table. As always, guys, check out the YouTube channel, youtube.com/ICQ podcast. Where you'll be able to see certainly videos we've done in the past at Friedrich Schaven, etc. recently. But again, if you want to listen to the show on YouTube, you can do that as well. You can also find the ICQ podcast as well on Spotify, as well as also all your leading podcasting channels. Obviously, think of us by donating by visiting icqpodcast.com/donate. As we always say, pays our way and keeps our on the internet and us full of coffee as well, which is always very, very important. Well, talking about the beverages, it's time to go get the kettle on and make Mum a cup of tea. So I better let you go, Dad, and sort it out for Mum.
Certainly will. She'll be in shortly, so a nice cup of tea and a bicky for Mrs. B. And as I say, she's in a very good mood at the moment, so that's good news. And Colin, you didn't mention the website. You know, that's your baby, isn't it?
Oh, geez. What is that website again? ICQpodcast.com.
There you go, and you can download our audio from there and check out some of the news stories.
Exactly. Well, guys, I say that's this one wrapped up. We'll see you all again in a fortnight's time. 73 is all.
73.